Hey everybody, this is Matt. Welcome back to the channel. And a few videos ago, I mentioned about rekeying the lock that came with the rear bins that I picked up for my conversion from the JDM seats. And a few people have asked and messaged me about how exactly I did that. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do in this video. I'm gonna pull this lock out and show you guys how to rekey some of the internal pieces of the lock so that maybe you can get it to work with a different key or the key that you have that you got with your car, or whatever reason you might need to do this. I'll go grab a screwdriver so I can pop this out, and then otherwise I'll show you real quick what you're looking at to get it out of the car, and then we'll head over to the workshop where I'll get everything set up and we'll get this lock taken apart, and I'll show you exactly what you need to do to get this rekeyed. So this is a little bit of a sneak peek of where the car is at today in comparison to the videos I've been releasing. Most of you might have a plastic trim that goes over top of the gap that I've got right here, but otherwise you're just going to pop those two Phillips head screws out and then just fish the lock out from the back. It's real easy. It's really not even worth showing you. Just take those two screws out and you can get it out. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll go over to the shop and we'll take this thing apart. And of course mine's already keyed to the key that came with my car, but I do have another key just to show you that even without having the right key, your key should still go into the lock. I guess the first thing to check is to make sure your key will actually go into the lock. Even though you can't turn it, it should still fit, because that'll be important for the disassembly of the lock. Aside from your key, you're probably going to need at least some sort of pick tool or a small flathead screwdriver, because there will be a place that we have to kind of release this to get the cylinders out. So whatever you got on hand, I've got different ones here. And while not necessary, I would recommend having a pen and paper or some way to organize the pieces that come out of the lock. The pieces that come out of here are very small, very easy to lose, and that's why I've actually set this up on an old t-shirt or cloth or whatever you've got, because there's little ball bearings, there's little tiny springs. If you lose those, might be very hard to find. So at least putting them on a bright surface that's soft, it'll catch them when they fall. This is just a little extra step to make sure we don't lose anything, because once we take this apart, it's going to be kind of trial and error on using different tumblers and springs and whatnot. So you may want a system to be able to organize, like if there's 6 of them or 5 of them, you can label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then try them in different orders. But at least that way you can keep track of all the different combinations that you've potentially used. So let's go ahead and get into taking this lock apart. So I've zoomed in so we can get a better look at what we need to do. Now, one thing that will be very important through this whole process is really we want to maintain our key inside of the lock. That's going to help us keep all the little bits and pieces that are inside there attached, at least as one piece, and then we can control the way that we take it apart. So go ahead and insert your key and get whatever tool that you're going to use to fit down in here. And this is the actual arm that swings around and catches the lock. And if you rotate it kind of on the top side, you'll see a little brass rectangle there. And what we're going to do is push down on that. And what that's going to do essentially is let this cylinder piece slide out. Again, if you don't have the key in there, you go to do this, it's basically going to instantly fall apart as soon as you take it out, and you're going to have pieces everywhere, and you're really not even going to know if you have everything, because there are a few little small pieces that we need to watch out for. I'll go ahead and show you the intent, but I might go ahead and flip it over and show you what to look out for. So you just press that in. It's not very hard. And then I've just barely pulled it out just so that I don't have to use that to hold it in. So if we rotate this over and then we slowly go ahead and pull it the rest of the way out, right there is a little ball bearing, a very tiny one. So we don't want to lose that, because that's kind of what indexes the key as it kind of clicks around. So that's just going to basically fall out as you disassemble the lock. So we'll just go ahead and knock it down there and then slowly take it apart. And that little click was the last little tumbler and the lock falling apart. So this basically is the piece that we just pushed in to release this. So you should get that piece out, plus you'll also get a little tiny spring. So if you did this without the key in, you would essentially end up with like 6 of these things shooting out at you all at once, and it gets very hectic because there are little parts. But again, little tiny ball bearing, you want to keep track of that. Each of these that we pull out is going to have a little spring, and then of course you've got the actual little tumbler. Now this is the one that goes at the very end. We're gonna reuse that one no matter what we do, so this one we'll definitely want to keep. I'm gonna go ahead and do is kind of get organized here. I'm gonna mark on my paper, just basically there's, let's call it the end, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5, including the one that goes in the end. So you could label them 1 through 6 or whatever you're going to do. So I'll get that marked up on my paper, and then we can go ahead and take all these apart and get them organized so that we can start fiddling with the lock. I've got this marked up just in a crude way so that I know where the different tumblers go. Now, this one was one I had left out from when I had done the rekeying process before, so just kind of ignore that right now. But this is the one that just came out of the end, and then I've just marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the various tumblers, and then I'll just remember that this is the end, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's pretty self-explanatory. So now if I were to just yank my key out, I would have pieces go flying everywhere because everything's under a little bit of tension because of each thing has its own little spring. Go ahead and pinch both sides so that nothing can come loose, and then you can go ahead and pull your key out. So now basically if I were to remove my fingers, everything would fall out. But what I'm going to do is just slowly let off the tension, and you can kind of see how now I've got one that's already popped up there. Some will come out of the bottom and some will come out of the top. So we kind of want to also kind of keep our eye on that orientation a little bit, because that is important moving forward. So again, I'll call the top the side where the end came out of. So this is number 4. So I'll go ahead and pull that out and put it over here with number 4 and get the spring out as well. And then if we flip this over, this is going to be number 1, this is going to be number 3, and then number 4, 5. And then we'll just go ahead and get all those springs out. So I'm not going to worry about organizing the springs because they're all the same. Now you basically have an empty cylinder and a bunch of these. If you held them up side by side, and you would notice that each one is a little bit different in its dimensions, its shape, and there's various different ways that these can be oriented to create a different lock situation. So essentially each of these is looking for the corresponding dimension of the key. When each of these are oriented so that they can match the actual shape of the key, they'll all tuck together and they're just the right way, which will allow this whole thing to turn. So it's pretty self-explanatory once you get it all apart, but for the most part, what I would recommend is trial and error. So I took these out in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, assuming that your key doesn't already work. That orientation isn't going to work. So maybe one option would be take 1 and 2 and flip those around. Another thing I found that helped was just do a few at a time. So instead of trying to get all 5 to work at once, try to do maybe 2 of them. See if that lets you put your key in. If it sits flush, you can go ahead and try to fit it in the body of the lock. And if it lets you turn it, then you kind of get an idea that at least those 2 keys will work in that location. Then you can add a 3rd one, then you can add a 4th one. So let's go ahead and try that real quick, just to give you an example of how it works. So again, this is the, what I'm calling the top. So let's try to put number 1 in the number 2 slot. So we'll need to go ahead and put a spring in here and then put the key in there. Now the key, basically all of them have this little nub that sticks out on the side that always goes where the spring is. So that goes there, and you kind of see that it just goes up and down. So let's try to put the number 2 into the number 1. Now, you could be writing all this down to make sure you don't get these mixed up in the long run, but just seeing how we're doing 2 of them, I'll just remember that we switched just number 1 and 2. I've got what I called the number 2 tumbler in the number 1 slot, and vice versa. So now, if I orient this, so this is the top, and then put my key in. So if you look, and maybe I hope the camera picks it up, but the tumblers on the top are at least flush or lower than the plastic body. So that wouldn't cause any interference. But if I flip this over, see how they both project above the body? So I know that neither of those is going to work, because if I try to insert it into the body real quick, so it would go like this. See, well, it'll let me put it into the body, but it won't let me turn. So that orientation is stopping this cylinder from turning in the body of the lock. So automatically we know that's not going to work. So again, I can release the pressure, take the key out, carefully let these come apart. This was the number 2 tumbler, and this was the number 1 tumbler. So if we were keeping track of all the different combinations that we're trying, at least we know those two can't go in those locations. So hopefully that makes sense. So it's just trial and error now from this point. You might want to try to put the number 1 tumbler into the number 3 and just keep fiddling around until you get a situation where they're going to be flush. In my case, I end up figuring out the number 1 tumbler, 3 tumbler, 4 tumbler, and 5 tumbler, but I could never get the number 2 tumbler to work out. So in my case, I just left it out. The lock still works just fine. I'm not looking for an immense amount of security on keeping my plastic lid secured. If someone really wants in there, they're gonna get in there regardless of what keys and tumblers I've got. So I'll reassemble it just with the combination that ends up working with me so that you can see how that works. But again, just gonna drop a spring in and it's pretty obvious where those springs need to go. And then this is the number 1 tumbler. So with all my tumblers in the orientation that I know they're going to work, last thing I can do is go ahead and drop in this end tumbler. So it just requires its little spring, and then the end piece just drops down in there as well. And then you'll need your ball bearing handy, and then the rest of the cylinder. Now, what I found to be the easiest way to do this, now that I've got the key in there, is go ahead and orient the bottom to be where the ball bearing is going to go, which also corresponds to kind of the bottom of the lock body. Now, you're also going to need your lock itself. So I'm just going to set that in there. Again, there's the little notch. I don't know if you can see that, but there's the little notch where this end tumbler is going to sit in. So that'll kind of be oriented like that. So I got my ball bearing, and then basically going to angle this in there to press that down. So get it started like that. And then I'll have to adjust that as we go, but let's go ahead and put the ball bearing in down here, which might be a little tricky if you've got fat fingers like I do. Might take a couple times to get it lined up. So that's in there. And what I usually do is just kind of use my thumbnail to hold that in place and then press it in. So hopefully you heard that click. And if we did it right, you should see that end tumbler again, and you should be able to pull your key, and I can't twist that, but if I put my key in there, now I should be able to click it. It might be a little clunky the first time you go to lock your lock because some of those tumblers do wear down a little bit over time. But as long as you get a few of those lined up, you'll be able to twist it like I can. And like I said, having one of them missing, I guess in theory, could make the lock a little less safe if somebody were really going to pick that. But considering most of this is just plastic, anybody that wants to break into that bin is going to be able to do that pretty easy. Hopefully you found this useful. I know a lot of people pick up the rear bins and potentially don't have the key that came with them. Or, if you did have an existing set of bins, you could just swap your key and lock into the new set that you get. But for me, I didn't even have a key that would work with a lock or a lock. So I was glad I was able to find this out, because now I can lock my rear bin if I need to. It really wasn't that bad. It was just a little bit of tinkering and getting the combination of the keys. Now, it might be a lot of trial and error. You also might need to have a little bit of luck that your key is relatively close. I can't imagine that they do too. There's a huge variance between the keys, and maybe that's why the number 2 just wouldn't work with my key, because that tumbler is just a different one, and they probably got multiples that they use. So I got 4 of the 5 to work. I might have been able to get the 5th one to work if I tinkered with it long enough, but for me, having 4 is more than enough, and it's fine. I know a lot of people like to do like different bin conversions and stuff, so if you happen to have your original lock, you can just swap those out. But if you happen to pick up a new set of bins and never had the key for it or the lock, this should hopefully work for you. The lock is back in the car. I can go ahead and show you real quick. If I can do this with one hand, get the key and turn it. So there you go. Super easy project. I was really happy I was able to figure this out because, like I said, I don't have that other trim piece that would hold the lid down otherwise. So at least now I can secure the lid with the lock. Otherwise, I just keep my premix and stuff in there and some tools. So if somebody wanted to steal that stuff, then they're going to do more damage to the car than breaking this lock anyway. I am no locksmith, but I just figured out that I could take that apart, and then with some trial and error, I was able to get everything sorted out. And like I said, I only used 4 of the 5 different little keys, but it's going to be plenty safe, and for what I need it to do, it's perfectly fine. If there's ever anything that you would like for me to go in more depth on that you see in one of my videos, just reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram, or leave a message on one of my videos, and I'll try to get back to you about that. If it's something I get a lot of interest in, I'll go ahead and do a video. Otherwise, I might just send you a message and give you some written instructions on how it was done. If you found this video helpful, please smash that like button and consider subscribing. Thank you for all your support. That's going to be enough for me today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one.